Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, the army continues to advance in the Sudanese capital days after dozens are killed in Khartoum in airstrikes. The devastating 18-month war has created the world's biggest humanitarian crisis and rolled back regional economic growth. Also, a new ambitious era for Senegal. The government unveils plans to deliver on President Bassirou Diomaye Faye's promise to carve out a new path for the nation, one that emphasises diversification of the economy and improved quality of life across the board. And West African fashionistas gather in Abidjan for the Ivorian powerhouse's first ever, would you believe it, Fashion Week. Key players from across the creative and clothing sectors gather together to swap know-how and style. But first, economic prospects for the whole of sub-Saharan Africa have taken a hit from Sudan's devastating conflict, which is amongst, if not the world's gravest humanitarian disaster. The World Bank has dropped its predictions for the entire region's growth next year from 3.4% to 3% and has pointed to Sudan's war as a key factor for this. Now, since a power struggle between rival generals plunged the country into violence last April, millions of civilians have borne the brunt of the chaos and clashes. A conservatively estimated 150,000 people have been killed. Despite the scale of the emergency, the war attracts relatively little international attention. Over the weekend, dozens more were killed in airstrikes on southern Khartoum as the army continues to advance on the capital. Laurent Berstecker tells us more.
Rising above the sound of gunfire, the call of the muezzin echoes around the Al-Shahid Mosque like a grieving cry to the heavens. The scene unfolded in the heart of Khartoum, where clashes between the Sudanese army and the Rapid Support Forces intensified over the weekend. On Saturday, the military carried out airstrikes on an open-air market south of the capital, killing several people. But as the army continues to showcase its superiority in the air, the RSF rebels still control large swathes of Khartoum and maintain their advantage on the ground. Last week, their leader Mohamed Daglo warned of his determination to keep on fighting.
This war won't end anytime soon, not in 2, 3 or 4 years.
18 months after the start of Sudan's bloody civil war, a diplomatic solution still appears out of reach. On Monday, the United Nations admitted to feeling powerless as it seeks to revive a negotiating process that's been at a standstill for months.
I participated in several discussions on the Sudan crisis, and I heard nothing that would make us hope that the men with arms devastating their own country would come to the negotiating table.
The international community has repeatedly raised alarm over the catastrophic situation in Sudan, where over 11 million people displaced by the conflict are being threatened by famine, but also by a lack of access to medical care and education. According to UNICEF, more than 80% of Sudanese children are currently unable to go to school because of the war.
Well, 7 months after President Bassirou Diomaye Faye took office, promising to take a radically different approach to inclusively boosting his country's economy, and the government's unveiled its roadmap for how to deliver on those pledges. It's a multi-billion-dollar, 25-year plan to shore up the private sector and generate jobs for young talent. Our Caitlin Kelly was following the launch for us from Dakar.
The Senegalese government have announced a 25-year plan to transform the country. Earlier this year, President Faye and his government were elected on a wave of enthusiasm with the promise of a new Senegal that wasn't reliant on countries like France, but moved towards an Afrocentric future. Today is the first time we're hearing concretely about the plans to action these promises. In a 6-hour ceremony full of fanfare, spoken word and music, there was a sense of optimism. One cartoon projected on the wall of the conference showed Senegalese rowing in fishermen boats, with President Faye at the helm pointing onwards. This speaks to one of the wider issues here in Senegal. There are still thousands leaving on these fishermen boats in hope of finding work in places like Europe. The policies announced today, things like the tripling of the GDP per capita, national health insurance, and big infrastructure projects across the country, are hoping to address some of these wider issues over the next 25 years.
We need to build a nation of solidarity and resilience, a nation firmly anchored in modernity, progress, and the well-being of every Senegalese. It's a vision for Senegal that aspires not just to participate in the world of tomorrow, but to play a major role in it, to be a leading player in the sub-region and a model of development for Africa.
Some commentators have welcomed the more tangible policies that they've seen today. Others are more critical and say the plan is overly ambitious and needs more detail. Here in Senegal, in just over a month, there will be parliamentary elections where President Faye will need to secure a majority over the current opposition coalition in order to make sure this vision becomes reality.
Caitlin Kelly there for us in Dakar. Now, the Super Eagles are safely back home in Nigeria now after the national football squad was held in an abandoned airport in Libya for more than 15 hours following their flight landing on Sunday. Now, the players have been flown back after having originally been in the country to play a qualifier on Tuesday for the Africa Cup of Nations, but they've now boycotted that match, with some players saying that they felt unsafe in Libya. The squad was forced to sleep in the airport. Nigeria's football federations sent a formal complaint to the Confederation of African Football and slammed what it's called the inhumane treatment of the national team. The Libyan Football Federation's denied deliberately doing anything wrong, and CAF is now investigating. Meanwhile, here in France, a judicial investigation into a former Rwandan Hutu rebel leader has been dropped. Calixte Barushimana was accused of orchestrating attacks in the 1994 genocide against the Tutsis in Rwanda. The 61-year-old's lived in France for the last 2 decades. Clément de Roma brings us more from Kigali.
Disappointment runs deep among Rwanda's survivors' associations. The Paris Judicial Court has dropped the genocide charges against Calixte Barushimana. This former Rwandan IT specialist working for the UN was indicted in France in 2010 for crimes against humanity, but he always claimed his innocence. He was accused of participating in a 1994 genocide against the Tutsis. His background is actually quite complex. He left Rwanda at the time, then resurfaced working for the UN in Kenya, Angola and Kosovo, where he was first arrested in 2001, but later released. He then obtained refugee status in France, where he continued to work. In 2010, the ICC pursued charges against him, but decided there was insufficient evidence. In France, however, the investigation continued until 2017, and the charges were finally dropped this month. The Civil Parties Collective that filed the complaints has announced they have appealed in Paris, accusing the French justice system of closing old cases without considering all the evidence. Barushimana was also accused of being the executive secretary in the FDLR, a movement of former genocidaires based in the DRC.
Clément de Roma there. Now, style is not lacking in Ivory Coast, if you've been lucky enough to go. So it might come as a surprise to you, as it did to me, that Abidjan hosted its very first Fashion Week this year. That's just wrapped up, and it was a chance for designers from across the region to present their creations to a very select few. The hope, though, is that the unveiling will lead to bigger and bolder events in the years to come. Our team managed to wangle a spot and sent us this report.
A turnout of several hundred people in a fashion first in Abidjan.
I'm Guinean and I've come all the way to support Telequam.
For me, Abidjan is already a very, very fashionable city.
It's a buzzing atmosphere backstage before the show kicks off.
The final preps are going well, but it's stressful. Very stressful.
16 designers from all over West Africa were represented. Some, like Ibrahim Fernandez, are no strangers to the European catwalk.
It's an already existing collection. I presented it for the first time in Paris a fortnight ago. So this is just the next step, and I can't wait to show the Ivorian public my work and my skills.
A few minutes later, the models set the catwalk alight. They walked the runways for more than 2 hours in front of guests who have come to celebrate African fashion. The highlight of the show, the display by Eli Kwam, a designer and organiser whose name was engraved into the event.
It's all about showcasing our talents, because we have craftsmanship. We have outstanding craftsmen not only in Côte d'Ivoire but on the continent. It's a crazy thing. We want to boost business because we have a huge consumer base. We've got over 300 customers concentrated here. So yes, we've got the capacity, we've got the talent, and we've got the ambition.
It's an exclusive event with the limited tickets starting at €220.
It was a real honor to be here and to see all these African designers representing the whole continent. It was incredible.
For the organisers, the aim now is to make Abidjan Fashion Week an annual event.
Looking good. Well, we head to Nigeria now, and a very special family-friendly event has wrapped up there in the southwestern town of Ibu-Ora. Now, festival goers were left making multiple double takes as the 5-day celebration of twins of all ages got underway. The town itself is extraordinary as it actually has an unusually high rate of twin births, boasting at least one set in every family. Take a look. I would say you'd want to see twins a bit.
For this event, we are not projecting a particular amount of twins, but for the past years, I could remember like 3 years or 4 years ago, we recorded 2,334 set of twins in the same field there in Ibu-Ora. So like 4 years ago. So.
There has been a lot of effort in the past by scientists, by researchers, medical researchers, to unravel the mysteries behind multiple pregnancy in Ibu-Ora.
That's it for Eye on Africa for now, though. Thanks for joining us. Do so again if you can. Till then, take care.